You do not want to be caught up in that delusion because you are a pawn of the devil. Way back in 1988, William Woods and Matthew David Cairns worked together at a hot dog cart in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Cairns ended up stealing Woods' wallet, which contained his Social Security card, and then he used it to build a fraudulent life. Within 2 years, he had false driver's license, loans, jobs, even a child, all under Woods' name. Decades later, Woods discovered he had huge debts in his name. Homeless now and desperate, he tried to straighten it all out at a Los Angeles bank, but he couldn't answer any of the security questions set by, you guessed it, Cairns. The bank called the cops. Woods was arrested and charged as Matthew Cairns, then was declared mentally incompetent. He spent more than a year behind bars and in psychiatric detention before agreeing to a no contest plea just to get out. He was then fined and forbidden to use his very own name. But he didn't give up. In 2021, DNA testing confirmed he was the real William Woods. Cairns finally confessed, "My life is over. My name is Matthew Cairns." In 2024, Woods was finally cleared, and in 2025, Cairns was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Woods is now back in Albuquerque, working to rebuild his life. Stealing one man's name not only ruined his life, but the life of the one who stole it. So, what happens when the name of an entire nation, the identity of an entire people, is stolen? You see, when we're busy trying to be someone we're not, it's impossible for us to understand who we truly are. But why did I choose to tell you this story? I told you that story because at the very center of our existence is a question of identity. And for 2,000 years, a similar sort of identity theft has occurred over and over again, not of one person, but of an entire nation. A.W. Tozer once said, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." And I couldn't agree more. I think he's spot on. Yet, what comes into our minds when we think about Israel is the second most important thing about us. And I know, it seems strange to say something like that, I get it. Yet for anybody who has studied world history or read the Bible, or read a headline for that matter for the past 100 years, the centrality of the narrative of Israel is simply inescapable. The past few years have revealed utter confusion of every demographic regarding the identity of Israel. And this isn't new. It's been basically the norm for 2 millennia. So if you're not a person of faith, just stick with me here. Perhaps you above all people can benefit most from understanding the identity of Israel. And for the person of faith who recognizes some authority of the Bible, I want you to consider this. The term Israel is used 2,500 times in Scripture, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. It then follows that if we get Israel wrong, we get the Bible wrong. This is part of the reason why there's so much confusion about Israel and the Jewish people. Are they even the same thing? Is Israel today the Israel of the Bible? Isn't the church the true spiritual Israel? These questions exist because regardless of religious creed or theology or political persuasion, masses are clueless about the true identity of Israel. And just like Matthew David Cairns, they're too busy many times stealing someone else's identity to understand their own. So this is what we're going to do. First, we're going to discover Israel's true identity. Then we're going to apply that true identity, that true definition, to those big questions like, is modern Israel biblical Israel? Is the church the true spiritual Israel? How does the true identity of Israel change how I perceive God and what he's doing on earth? And finally, you're going to see how just one simple definition of the true identity of Israel informs modern day headlines and reveals an age-old evil that above all things, you cannot afford to be a part of. So, let's start digging. Something we need to think about when we look at discovering the identity of Israel is our own preconceived beliefs about Israel and the Jewish people. And this goes for both Jews and non-Jews. Some of you have never really thought about the term before, or the terms before. Some of you maybe have thought a lot about what they are or might mean. But most people haven't. Even people who use the terms frequently haven't ever drilled down to discover what the true identity of Israel is. I once contacted an organization to be unnamed, humanitarian organization, with the term Jews in its title. Jewish identity was and is a big part of the work that they do. And I like what they were doing. And I run a similar organization. I wanted to see if we could partner together in some way. So I asked what their definition of a Jewish person was. After all, I would think that if you want to target a specific demographic or humanitarian work, for humanitarian work, you would actually need to identify who falls inside and outside of that specific demographic. Makes sense, right? They said that they didn't have a definition of what it is to be Jewish. And that puzzled me, because how could an organization have no official definition or really idea that they wanted to share of a word that was so central to its title and focus? So that's a lot of us. A lot of you are in the same position. You're using the term Israel and Jewish people or whatever a lot, and yet you've done the same thing as this organization. You don't really have an identity drilled, put down to pen to paper, I guess you could say. So I can't cover all of the different views that might be rolling around in your heads, but I'm going to cover a couple of them just to kind of say, here's what some people believe, and then we can juxtapose that to what I think is discoverable in the Bible. So Jews, here's one of them. Jews are a people that follow the religion of Judaism. This is actually what most Gentiles believe about Jews, that Jews are people who simply follow the religion of Judaism. Another one is Jews are people who live in Israel. Jews are descendants of the Israelites of the Bible. Jews are a race of people having something to do with ancient Hebrews. Another common one in the church, at least church circles, is Jews are a spiritual concept or phenomenon. If one is part of the church, then one is a spiritual Jew. These are not my opinions. These are what other people believe, including you who are watching this video, some of you. So notice I'm only using the term Jew, not Israel. The term Jew is a relatively late word derived from Old French, and it arrives in English about the 13th century AD. And it's undoubtedly, of course, tied to Judea, the land of Judea, or the ancient kingdom of Judah, but it isn't really relevant for our quest to discover the true identity of Israel, because it doesn't contribute to an original definition of identity. We can't define something's origin by a later construct in the future. It doesn't work that way. What we will discover is that the term Jew is just a late substitute, you could say, for a biblical Israelite. And although it's, the common vernacular today, it tends to only confuse most people who don't know the etymology of the word. And I bring this up to make you aware that we often think we understand something based largely in part on a fictional narrative. It's how many things come to us, but we're not aware of it. So in the book, The Rooted Kingdom, I talk about a person who tries to learn everything about apples, having only experienced apple pie. How much could you ever really know about such a thing as, a dessert with so many ingredients, right? So how could you know about apples from a dessert with all these other things involved? Could you even come up maybe with the conclusion of what an apple even looked like? What if it was from a tree or a bush? Was it sweet, or is it simply sweet because of the sugar that's in the pie? Maybe somehow apples also have cinnamon in them as they grow. That is, if they are a plant. We assume they are. We're eating them, right? So this is how most people have come to their understanding of Israel and the Jewish people. They have been eating apple pie, thinking that's what tells them everything about apples and where they come from. Although unlike the example of the pie, we actually have sitting next to us a complete picture of the origins and history and past, present, and even future of who and what Israel is. But we haven't bothered to take the time to pick up and examine that book. So keep this in mind as we move from apple pie to the apple tree and the fruit itself, if you will. Just like you can't rely on apple pie to give you that full picture, you can't rely on man-made religious traditions or theological bias or systems or even secular histories totally that only add to the ingredients of the pie but distracts us from the genuine McCoy. Okay, so let's go all the way back to Genesis and see what that can tell us about this apple pie. All right, well, listen, this masterclass on the identity of Israel is just a, proverbial tip of the iceberg as far as what is in the Rooted Kingdom book, solving the riddle of Israel, the church, and the kingdom. So if you enjoy this, even if you don't enjoy it, you need to be challenged on this subject. Pick up a copy of the Rooted Kingdom. We wrote it for you guys. Spent a lot of time, effort into thinking about where you are, the kind of teaching that isn't out there, and how this can really help you in your Bible study and in understanding your worldview. Okay, so all right, enough of that. Let's get going here. Defining Israel. We need to go, like I said before, back. We got to go back to Genesis. All right, we're going to go all the way back and see the origins here. And just an acronym I came up here for you is BIG. We need to understand that before Abram is called out of Ur in Genesis 12, before the Abrahamic covenant is given in Genesis 15, or Abraham and talking to God himself in Genesis 17, where Sarah laughs at the fact that she's going to have a child. The reason that she's laughing is because she is barren. This was a barren beginning to the nation of Israel. Maybe you've never heard the Jewish people be called a nation before, but that's really what we're going to focus on, is discovering the true origins, the true identity here. So Genesis 11:30, but Sarah was barren. She had no child. And the Hebrew here for barren is actually sterile. She can't have children. And so this beginning is barren. It's a barren beginning. Therefore, God chose to use a barren woman. This was his choice. So this was an intentional choice. This is a very intimate moment between God and humanity specifically, but also God and Sarai. Like to say later in Genesis 17 that you are going to have a child. That's why Sarah laughs. Like, this is what? What's going on here? So this isn't just some people group that God took and used for a purpose and then got rid of later. From the very beginning, he chose this specific scenario so that Abraham and Sarah would know this is of God. This is a miraculous thing that he's doing for two very old people, 90 and 100 years, okay, right in there. Very old, they're advanced in years. She already can't have children. We already know that, okay? And so God wanted this to be miraculous. This is not an accident. Also, that it wasn't just a people, but a great nation. So when we move forward here to Genesis 12, 1-3, I'm going to read this. I'm going to point out a couple of things here. I don't have time to go into all of the nuance of the calling of Abram, all of the nuance of everything that we're going to get into in other episodes and other master classes here. But in this one specifically, I'm going to cover a couple things and then we're going to move on, because I want to, again, this is all about discovering the identity, the definition of Israel. So we can't get distracted by lots of things that I want to get distracted on that maybe that you want to know about, okay? That'll be later. Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. And you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Again, I don't have time to get into the blessings and cursings, although it's extremely important. This is just about defining Israel. So that will be for another time. Let's keep going here. I want to point out this phrase here. It's actually includes all of this. Ve'esecha lagoy gadol. So this I'm going to do for you, basically make you get rid of all that, a great nation. This is the term for a great nation, and it's goy gadol. All right. This word here, goy, it simply means nation. Okay. It simply means nation. There's so much going on right now that somehow goy is this derogatory term, that Jews use this term in a derogatory way. Now, I'm sure there's been somebody at some point in history, a Jewish person, who's used goy and a derogatory word way, just like every other human being on earth has used other terms to discriminate or to bully other people, all right? But I can tell you as a Jew, as an Israeli, I actually can't think of a single time, I'm sure it's happened, but I cannot think of a single time in my life where the term goy is used in a derogatory way. And why is that? Because we understand it in its original context that it simply means nation. God is calling Abram and he says, I'm going to make you a great nation. Okay? So let's keep moving here. I guess that's all I wanted to tell you for that part. So let's keep going here. The point here is that Israel is a nation. God creates a nation. And as we look at scripture here, here's just some cases, some instances. Genesis 12:2, we just read that. God creates a mighty nation through Abraham. Genesis 18:18, promised to become a mighty nation. Exodus 19:6, you're going to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. This isn't talking about the church. This is talking about Israel. Deuteronomy 4:6-8, it's called a nation. 2 Samuel 7:23-24, God's holy, chosen, and blessed nation. Jeremiah 31:35-37, a nation before God forever, never to perish. Ezekiel 37:22, nation united in the land of Israel after dispersion. Luke 7:5, Jews equaled the nation of Israel. Acts 10:22, Jews equal the nation of Israel. And 1 Peter 2:9, Israel followers of Yeshua have fulfilled Exodus 19:6, being called a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. So Israel is the created nation. It's that simple. All right, now, we're going to see here in a minute who belongs to that nation, right? But as we move forward here and we look at membership, I want you to keep this in mind. Nation that God has created is not defined and it isn't characterized in a way that most human beings, us today, would characterize and define a nation. All right? So, who belongs to the nation of Israel? All right, who belongs to Israel? What is the membership of Israel? Now, I fully recognize that we haven't even seen the term Israel yet. Okay, I fully recognize that. But as we move forward here, I want you to understand that Abram has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. These are children according to promise. All right. And Jacob has 12 sons, which become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, then Jacob, you might remember this scene where he wrestles with God and God changes his name to Israel. All right. Which literally means man struggles with God. So that's all where we're leading. So I understand we haven't seen the term Israel yet. So, but when I say nation, the only nation that comes from Abraham specifically, where the promise is passed to Isaac and to Jacob, which we're going to get to in a second, the only nation there is Israel. All right. That's the context here. So Abram's promised to be a great nation. They're promised to a barren womb. This is a barren beginning, an intimate and intentional purpose to create a great nation, big. But what about membership? Okay. Membership is decreed by patrilineal succession. That means it comes through the father. So Isaac receives the blessing, not Ishmael. Genesis 26:2-3. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt, live in the land which I shall tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I give all of these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham, your father. So it's Isaac that is given because he is the promised impossible child, not Ishmael. Why not Ishmael? Was something wrong with Ishmael? No. Was something wrong with Hagar the Egyptian, the maidservant of Sarai? No. But she could have children. And so her having a child was not miraculous. Her having a child was not something that God can point to and say, look, this is what I did, not you. And we know that he goes on to bless Hagar and he blesses Ishmael and he becomes a great nation in and of himself. He blesses him. but it isn't the chosen, created nation of God. That's a different thing. So that's why not Ishmael. All right. What about Jacob? Isaac, of course, has Jacob. We have the story of Jacob and Esau, or Esav in the Hebrew. Jacob receives the blessing, though, not Esau. Genesis 28:12-15. This is the famous Jacob's ladder dream. And I'll skip down here to the middle here. All your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east, to the north and the south. And you and your seed and all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. Wow. So Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and not Esau. Again, children according to promise. So immediately, that is, if you're a Christian or you're a reader of the New Testament, you might recall Romans 9, 10, 11. Heirs according to promise, right? Not Ishmael, not Esav, not Esau, but Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it's very clear throughout the text that membership is through patrilineal succession, patrilineal descent. So Genesis 12, 15, 17, 22, 26, 28, 35, God's eternal promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob of land, seed, and blessing is secured. Again, we're not going into the land. We're not going into the general blessing. We're not even going to go into the seed here, because ultimately it's talking about a singular seed which blesses the entire world and fulfills all these promises to the nation of Israel, which is ultimately the Messiah. But we're sticking on definition here. So we're going to focus on membership right now. And membership is patrilineal. Genesis 35, 11-12, God said to him, so this is still, skip, okay, yeah. I'm backing up a little bit, but be fruitful and multiply. A nation and company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, I give to you. Of course, he's talking to Jacob here, or Israel. And to your descendants after you, I give this land. So membership, patrilineal succession, and marriage. Genesis 49, 1-28. Jacob blesses all 12 sons, and tribal identity, and thus membership in the nation is passed through the father. Numbers 1:18, genealogies recorded by fathers' houses. Numbers 36, the land inheritance is tied to tribal identity. So the inheritance of the land which God has promises to Israel can only happen through tribal identity, which is patrilineal. Also, we see that women who marry Israelite men are also considered part of the nation. So Ruth and Rahab and Zipporah, Moses' wife. So what we see is that national identity is not specifically an ethnic thing. Okay? Moshe marries a Midianite woman, right? Rahab is actually Canaanite. Ruth is Moabite. So these were not Hebrews. Ethnically speaking, they're probably pretty similar because a lot of these people were from Shem, but there could be a chance that Zipporah was actually from Ham originally. So again, we talk about Semites coming from Shem, that kind of thing. Not to get sidetracked here, but the point is that women who marry Israelite men are considered full members of the nation of Israel. They are Israelites. Okay. All right. There's a million things I want to say here, but I got to keep going. I want to keep on track here. So defining Israel, the definition of Israel is the nation created by God through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All descendants of Jacob through the father, women who marry into the nation, and I would argue children adopted into those families if they weren't originally, let's just say they're from someone outside the nation and they were adopted by a family of the nation, are considered members of national Israel, aka the Jewish people. A nation whose existence is never determined by borders, numbers, beliefs, location, or even loyalty to God. So, not how we would define typically a nation, right? And as we move forward, now that we see that, okay, we've got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, miraculous created entity by God. Only he is doing it. How are you a member? Through your father. That's how you gain a tribal identity. My family name is Halevi. I'm a Levite. There are other Levitical names. There's also some Judean or quasi House of David names, we could argue. Now, all the records have been lost. And so these are things that are passed down orally to us. So can we be 100% sure that I'm from the tribe of Levi? No, I can't say that. But no one else can say that either. And it's actually, brief caveat, not to get sidetracked, why the Messiah had to come before the second temple was destroyed. Got a hair in my mouth. Okay. I don't want to get sidetracked there. That's another video, another story, another episode. But the next question that we want to ask is, all right, so, okay, we got a definition of the nation. Israel, aka the Jewish people, nation created by God, patrilineal succession through the father, women who marry into the nation. That is who Israel is, okay? It's not a religious identity. It's not a location identity, all right? It's not a traditional identity. This is a work of God. Very important. But what about modern Israel? Is modern Israel biblical Israel? Is modern Israel biblical Israel? There is so much going on online in your religious circles, wherever they might be, on this question. And most of it is Christians, unfortunately, desperately trying to say that modern Israel is not biblical Israel. You might be able to guess where I'm going to fall on this, but let's start here. So, modern Israel equals biblical Israel? Israel is an unchanging nation. There is never a time throughout the entirety of Scripture, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, where God changes the identity or definition or the way he perceives the nation that he created, nor the membership thereof. Okay? So as we go through here and look, there's some things that I want you to be paying attention to. Right? If I go back to this slide here, a nation whose existence is never determined by borders, numbers, beliefs, location, or even loyalty to God. And I'm going to add one more to that, which is administration. The governing factor of Israel never determines the identity of Israel. Okay? So, unchanging nation. Israel under the patriarchs. So, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, first in Canaan, then they go down to Egypt. Israel in slavery in Egypt, not under the Mosaic law yet. Israel under Moses, Levitical law and wilderness wanderings. The tabernacle is there. God is dwelling with the people. Israel under Joshua enters the land. And they have the tabernacle, and God dwells with the nation with Joshua as their leader. Then we have Israel under the kings, under judges after Joshua dies. And then Israel says, hey, we want a king. And God says, no, I don't want a king for you. And they go, no, we want a king. And he's like, no, I don't want a king for you. And they're like, no, we want a king. So he gives them Saul. All right. Saul turned out to be a disaster. Eventually, David takes over the throne, as we knew would happen from Genesis, because it is prophesied over Judah that the scepter or the kingship shall never depart from Judah. Israel in exile and foreign authority. Assyria, Babylon come in and take over and exile part of the population of Israel. The temple is destroyed and the people are in rebellion at this point, many of them. That's why they're being carted off, because they didn't let the land rest. They weren't observing the law of Moses. Then Israel comes back into the land under Ezra and Nehemiah, and and people are split. Some are inside the land of Israel, and some are outside the land of Israel. The majority is actually outside the land of Israel, but some return. Estimates put it between 40 and 80,000. And then under Greek and Roman rule, we have Roman dispersion. All right, so the Hellenists come in and conquer the land, then Romans conquer the Hellenists. We have Roman rule, and that's where we find ourselves in the 1st century. So, pretty interesting here, isn't it? Because the argument that is, well, actually, very few arguments are actually made. They just say, no, modern Israel can't be biblical Israel. But some of the caveats are, well, because the temple doesn't exist anymore, or because the Mosaic law is dead, because Jesus fulfilled the law, because yada, 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 yada. but they never actually address the true identity of Israel, and that things like where Israel is, are they in the land, are they out of the land, doesn't matter. Number of Jews in existence doesn't matter. Whether they're following God or not doesn't matter. Are they being ruled by a foreign power outside the land or in the land? Doesn't matter. We see virtually every form and fashion of existence up to the first century that Israel could possibly undergo. Foreign rule, local rule from God through the tabernacle and temple system, rebellious rule without foreign rule without a temple or tabernacle system, prophets being killed, prophets being heard, obeyed sometimes. Sometimes their word was heeded, mostly not. So hopefully this is becoming clear to you that God's saying that Israel is a nation before him forever. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the apple of his eye isn't affected by any of the human history of Israel or the government for that matter. So let's keep going here. Ezekiel 36 and 37. In the 1850s, Israel begins to return to the land of Israel, and very importantly, in unbelief. If you're reading the Bible and you read Ezekiel 36 and 37, which is the dry bones prophecy, this is God prophesying that he will bring the Jewish people, the nation of Israel. He doesn't say the Jewish people. That word doesn't exist yet. He will bring the nation of Israel, the people for his possession, back to the land because they repent? Nope. Because they're good all of a sudden? Nope. He says, because I'm tired of my name being blasphemed among the nations because of you, that I'm going to bring you back into the land. So he does it for his name's sake. So what we should expect to see Israel look like when they did finally return to the land, when I'm one of them, return to the land, is a population that is not following God. They're in unbelief. They're secular, if you will. And we can argue about what it means to follow God. That's another topic. But the point is that what we're seeing today and what we have been seeing since the 1850s, well before 1948, 100 years before that, Jews began to return to the land, even though there were already Jews living here, by the way. Jews have never left the land. We've always been in the land. In small populations, yes, but we've always been here from the very beginning. Literally from Joshua coming to the land, a portion of the people of Israel have always been in the land from that day to this day. So what we should expect to see, according to the Bible, of what God says will be in the land of Israel is exactly what we see today. And the last thing in that passage that he does is he says, I'm going to remove a heart of stone and place in you a heart of flesh. He is not talking about some ecumenical church identity here. He's talking about the nation of Israel and the purposes and promises he has made to them that he is fulfilling in this renewed state of Israel. So 1949, Israel elects a parliamentary democracy. Does somehow Israel having a secularly elected democracy ruling over them make them cease to not be the nation of Israel that God created? No, because no government or organization of administration over the nation of Israel has ever determined whether it's a state or a nation that God created. That is not one of the criteria. What are the criteria? Let's go back. Descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, through the father, women who marry in, and their children. That's who the nation of Israel is. So, let's look at the future. That's how things sit today. What about future Israel? Luke 22, 29 through 30. Yeshua describes his disciples, Jesus of Nazareth, ruling over the 12 tribes of Israel. This is the prophetic future during the millennial or the messianic kingdom, a physical reign over a physical kingdom of Israel as prophesied in Isaiah 2, 9, 11, Zechariah 14, 16, and Ezekiel 37. So it isn't just past Israel. It isn't just present Israel. It is future Israel that is still the nation created by God for his own purpose and possession. Now, there are lots of identifying factors of how that will be characterized, what the land will look like, what the kingdom will look like, how that relates to the nations around it, and entities like the ecclesia, the assembly of Messiah, aka the church. This is not a show about that. This is not an episode about that. This masterclass is to identify, again, to discover the identity, the nation's definition. So we're an unchanging nation. The nation that God created 4,000 years ago through Abraham and Sarai's barren womb still exists today. Some of us live inside the land, about half the population of the Jewish people, and about half the population of the Jewish people live outside the land of Israel that God gave us as an eternal possession. So regardless of time, leadership, covenant, location, percentage of belief, or type of administration, Israel's identity as a nation created by God never changes. So modern Israel is biblical Israel, the apple of God's eye. And where do we get this term for apple of God's eye? In Zechariah 2:8, it actually doesn't say apple of his eye in the Hebrew. The term that's used is for the pupil of the eye. It means that Israel is the very focus. It is the very center focus of his attention, of his view, of his perspective, of his intent. It's this very intimate way of saying, you are everything that I am about. And it is Israel's future in the messianic kingdom that's being referred to here. So it's not, we have this same phrase used of Israel in other ways, in other passages, but this is specifically talking about future Israel. And again, what is the definition of Israel? A nation, not a spiritual entity, not a phenomena that you could be a part of if you believe the right things. No, it is the nation created by God. Now, there's always been a portion of the people of Israel that have disobeyed God, and a portion of the people of Israel that have not obeyed God and obeyed God, right? So, I know some of you are screaming at your phones or your laptops. What about? Okay, what about some common objections? Hopefully I can, clairvoyantly perceive some of the things that you might be rummaging around your brain. What about this? What about that? So let's cover, what are some common objections to this definition that I've just given? So common objections, I'm going to cover two. And there's more than that, I'm sure. But as we think about the Jewish people, Israel, many of you non-Jews have heard that your Jewishness comes from your mother. And so you're thinking, wait a second, I thought that being Jewish came from your mother. And if you are Jewish, that's certainly something that you've heard and probably believe. Although pretty much all Jews recognize, if you've been brought up in any kind of religious way, even if you just go to shul or synagogue a couple of times a year, that our tribal identity comes from our father. Everybody knows this, but over time, beginning in about the 2nd century AD, but really being developed in the Middle Ages, there came about a theory that your Jewishness comes from your mother. Well, where does this come from? It comes from a discussion that has been going on for quite some time. The earliest reference that we have is in about 200 AD in a work called the Mishnah, Kedushin 3:12, which basically there's a discussion on, if you don't know who the father is, how do you know if the child is Jewish or not? And basically they came down to, if the mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish. The problem with this is that we're kind of using the term to define the term, okay? If the mother's Jewish, the child's Jewish. Well, how do you know if the mother's Jewish? Well, if her mother's Jewish, then she's Jewish. Well, we're using the term to define the term. It doesn't work. All right. Now, I understand the problem in that if you don't know who the father was, how do you know if the child is Jewish? But really, so if the mother is raising the child, then the child is Jewish. And this really gets down to, at its core, a religious description of what it is to be Jewish. That is to say, this entire discussion in Judaism is framed in within the framework of Pharisaical post-Second Temple Judaism. All right? That is to say, it is a religious definition. A definition of a Israelite or a Jewish person which hinges upon one's belief or upbringing in the religion of Judaism. All right? The major problem with this is that Judaism is not the religion of Judaism, or any other religion for that matter, has no bearing on whether someone is Jewish or not, whether someone is a member of the nation of Israel. Remember, religion has no weight when it comes to whether or someone is or isn't a member of the nation of Israel, biblically speaking. And that's all that matters now. And so my point here is that a rooted reality, okay, the text itself, which is our rooted reality, versus rabbinic, what I call rabbinic revision, the text wins every single time. So we can't go to the 2nd century AD and redefine what it means to be Jewish, or how someone is Jewish, that is, how someone is a member of the nation of Israel, based upon what human intervention or human revision has to say. We can only go to the text to determine how someone is a member of the nation of Israel, which membership in the nation of Israel, in the context that I'm using it, is what it means to be Jewish. You cannot convert to be a Jew. I understand you can convert to Judaism. You could follow Judaism. I understand that. But you're a proselyte to a religion of Judaism, which is post-Second Temple. Post-Second Temple Judaism, and this is not a secret amongst the Jewish community. This is not even debated. Everyone knows who follows Orthodox Judaism or even conservative Judaism today understands that it is a product of what Jews basically came up with to try to observe the Torah without the temple's existence. This is a whole other video on what I think about that and everything like that. I just want to stick to, again, try to keep it focused here. But there are consequences if we get, obviously, the definition of Israel wrong. And we cannot go and revise that definition that the text clearly lays out thousands of years later. All right? And the establishment of the nation of Israel and membership therein, I should say, is hundreds of years, approximately 430 years, something like that, before the law is given. So even for you rabbinical Jews, my friends, my neighbors, my family members, that would like to say that, well, no, Judaism goes all the way back to Abraham. It doesn't. Okay? Israelites go back to Jacob, sure. But Israelites were a nation. We were a people with, well before the Mosaic law was even given. So even if you want to say that Judaism goes all the way back to the Mosaic law in the form that we have today, which it doesn't, we know this. We know it's a post-Second Temple destruction religion. But even if you want to say that, it still can't define the membership of the nation of Israel, because we had membership of the nation of Israel well before the giving of the law, well before Moses. And so later rabbinic revision and discussion cannot change the meaning, cannot change membership in the identity of Israel. We have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to the source text. Okay? Now, likewise, let me cover this really quickly, because some of you are going to be caught up in the Ezra chapters 9 and 10 discussion of, well, no, it clearly says that Israelite men who married non-Israelite women, that their children weren't Jewish. It does not say that. Go back and read those two chapters as best you can without a rabbinical mindset of revising what it means to be Jewish, and understand that under the Mosaic law, neither men nor women could marry men or women or men, from pagan tribes or peoples of the land. All right. That was strictly prohibited under the Mosaic law. And so if the mother being Jewish makes the child Jewish, then it would be okay for an Israelite woman to marry a pagan man because the child would be Jewish, be Israelite. But that is not at all what's going on. In context, there were specific groups of people within Israel, individuals that married outside the nation and married specifically pagan peoples. And those pagan peoples were bringing their idolatry into the nation. That is what God was wanting to stop. It doesn't have anything to do with the kids not being Jewish or Israelites. It has everything to do with not bringing pagan culture in to associate with Israelite true faith. That's what it's talking about, okay? So again, nationhood membership is well established and what we've already defined, and so we need to stick to that. So any unclear passages that might, I don't even think the Ezra 9 and 10 passage even come close to even challenging the definition that we've discovered already here of a national entity whose membership is through patrilineal lineage and women who marry into the nation. It doesn't challenge that at all. It's simply a period of time when Israelites were returning back into the land and they were marrying pagans again, and God said, you can't do that. That's all it's talking about. All right. So perhaps the most common second objection is from the Christian world. And that second objection, I want to frame this as tangible tribes versus theological theory. Okay? Tangible tribes versus theological theory. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean that we've already laid out that national Israel is a tangible nation created by God. We are a real people in real time and space with physical promises to us. We didn't get into the promises. I get that, this video. But the point is we're tangible. We're a real thing. We're not some mystical invention. You cannot allegorize or spiritualize our nature away. The text does not allow it. And if we want to go and discover the true meaning of Israel, we have to go to our origins, which we've already done. So what happens later in history is that the church fathers, who are known as church fathers, I don't call them that because of their anti-Semitism, because of their false theologies. It doesn't mean that everything they said was false, but the systems and the theologies that they developed are completely antithetical and against the created nation of Israel, of our purpose, of promises to us, and where God is leading us in the future. So not just back then, not just now, but also the future coming kingdom. And so this really ties all the way back to that original story that I told you guys, that I brought forth about the hot dog cart and the wallet getting stolen, okay? Because we should not be stealing other people's identity, all right? One of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not steal. And the belief that the church, quote, is the true Israel, which misdefines both the church and Israel in one statement, that statement is allegorical mysticism. Allegorical mysticism. What do I mean by that? In order to believe that all the promises to Israel are now fulfilled in the church and that the, quote, church is the true Israel of God, or even, let's just stick with that. You have to take words in a time and place in their context, words like Israel, words like covenant, words like land and promise, all of these things, and then you have to make them so that they have no actual historical, grammatical meaning. And you spiritualize them. You allegorize them. You make them into metaphor or simile. And you have to do that because there is no way, there is no path for the definition of Israel as a physical nation created by God, as we've already laid out, that we've already discovered here. There's no path for that to become this spiritual allegorized entity that people want to say is the true Israel of God, aka the church. It is an impossibility. And if you do that, what it does in turn is it takes all of biblical precedent, all of the covenants and promises of God, and it turns them into language that no longer mean anything to the original hearer of the word of God or the present day hearer of the word of God. Once you take those terms and you spiritualize them or you allegorize them, whose allegory are you using? Whose spiritual terms, where is the objective standard that you're appealing to say, this is what the true allegory is, this is what the true metaphor is, this is what the true spiritual nature of these things are? Because you can't find it in the text. You have to invent those meanings. And so the statement, the church is the true Israel of God, is an invented allegorical mysticism. It's mystical, it's spiritual, it's in the air, it's whatever comes over the reader at that point in their emotional state and their spiritual state now becomes the meaning of what they want it to mean. Our invention does not make something true. Us coming up with the new idea about something does not make it true. Our opinions about something do not make it true. Who is Israel in her historical grammatical creation? That is what Israel is today, because God, as we're going to see in a moment, has never changed that identity. If God has never changed the identity of Israel, we have no place to change the identity of Israel. If God's purpose and promise and creation of the nation of Israel and promises to her have never changed, then you cannot steal that identity or those promises and apply them to yourself. You might not understand how that works in today's culture, today's times, or whatever, but that does not give you the ability or the opportunity to change those identities, those definitions, those promises, and steal them for yourself. It's that simple. Now, just a kind of a practical way to think about this is, what is your unit of measurement? What does that mean? Okay. I've been a cabinet maker most of my life, and I built houses a long time ago. And when we would go to build a house, we would get a set of plans from the architect. And we would, as a team of carpenters, we would sit down and say, okay, here's our foundation. The guys have just gotten done with it. Now we need to frame up this house. Bobby, you take this section. Phil, you take that section. Mike, you take this section. And me and John will do the roof. Okay, when you guys are done, we'll lay out the roof. When you guys are done with the walls, we'll put it all together. Okay, so what do you think is the most important thing when we're looking at those blueprints and then we're all splitting off to build our different sections of the house? The most important thing, because we're all using the same blueprint, that doesn't change. The most important thing is the unit of measure that we're using. So in the United States, we used imperial measurements, so inches. Here in Israel, we use the metric system, okay? Now, what if half of the guys were using a metric system? Actually, let's put it this way. What if a third of our team was using a metric system, a third of the team was using imperial system, and another third of the team invented their own system, okay? And that's what people are doing when they come to the Bible itself. Okay? When you're using a historical, grammatical reading of the text, meaning when the plain sense of Scripture makes sense, you seek no other sense. All right? Then we're all using inches. We're all on the same team. We're all looking at the same blueprint, and we're all building our walls with the same unit of measure. Now, you can go to Home Depot or you can go to Ace Hardware or wherever and buy 10 different tape measures. And you know what? They're all going to be just a little bit different. Even though they're all inches, it's just complications in manufacturing. They're not all going to be exactly the same, exactly perfect, but they're going to be pretty close. So as long as we're using the same historical grammatical reading of the text, we might come up with slight variations here and there, but we're going to let the text speak for itself. Theological mysticism invents your own unit of measure. And so you're looking at a blueprint which the architect has laid out in inches, but yet because you've brought your own unit of measure, which you invented yourself, the house will never end up turning out how the architect intended. It's impossible. It will never happen. And so that's why I'm asking you, what is your unit of measure? Have you come up with a preconceived notion of how you need the text to fit into your worldview? In other words, you think that you're building the kingdom, or you think that you're the true Israel of God, or you think that you're a spiritual Jew. You've invented your own unit of measure, because that is not at all what the text is saying. I know I'm getting beyond what the definition of Israel here, but this is the consequence of stealing the identity of Israel, is that you get the entire building wrong. You've looked at the blueprint, the Bible, you've invented your own unit of measure, allegory, theological mysticism, and now you've come up with the building that God never meant to exist. And you're living in that building as if the roof doesn't leak, the doors don't swing open, when the wind blows, that the windows aren't cracking under the falling weight of the crooked walls, and you act like it's a perfect mansion. When the reality is that you're living in a world that was never meant to be and that God never meant to exist. Therefore, you're not living in a world that's real. You're literally insane to reality. I'm not saying you're insane, okay? If you're watching this, if you've gotten this far, you're a thinking person, okay? I get that. So I'm just trying to lay out, you want to be sure that your unit of measure, the historic or grammatical reading of the text, the plain sense of the text means the plain reading of the text. It's that simple. And if you're reading the text that way, that's how you're going to discover how this true definition of Israel affects not only the whole Bible, but all of human history, past, present, and future. So, how does this work? Here's some practical stuff here. Israel is the nation defined by God that participates in the assembly of Messiah by belief in Yeshua. So many people who say that either the church is the true Israel or that Israel and the church are separate, they're both wrong. What do I mean by that? I mean, one mystifies and allegorizes and spiritualizes a physical, tangible, tribal nation, okay, which is wrong. You can't spiritualize it. The other one treats Israel and the church as individuals that can never co-inhabit, which is also wrong. What do I mean by that? If you're an Israelite following Yeshua of Nazareth, like myself, I'm a member of the assembly of Messiah, of the ecclesia, aka the church. The church is a terrible term. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual definition of what it is. In Hebrew, we say keilah. It's a congregation. And in the text itself, the New Testament, we are talking about an assembly, an ecclesia. An assembly of what? It's an assembly of Israelite followers of Yeshua and members of the nations, aka Gentiles, Gentile followers of Yeshua. And we exist in one body together. Distinctions? Yes. Equal at the foot of the cross? Yes. Just as men and women are different in marriage, Jews and Gentiles also have distinctions within the body of Messiah. And that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. And Paul and other epistle writers talk about this extensively. You may have missed it. Now that you know the true definition of Israel, however, now that when you're reading through those epistles, you're going to start to recognize these things. Oh, okay, I get that, how Paul could be talking to Israelites here and not talking to Gentiles and vice versa, and that's okay. It relieves all of that tension. All right, so Israel retains its unique identity, purposes, and promises. Gentiles, the nations, Hagoyim, again, not a dirty word, it's just describing any people groups outside of the nation of Israel, are grafted into the household of God, Ephesians 2, and share in the salvation of Messiah with Israel. Very important here. The church is not an age, but an assembly of both believing Israel and people from the nations who follow Messiah. One body, two unique and purpose-filled identities. So some of you might have been yelling at your phone or your computer. This is just some idiot dispensationalist, yada, yada, yada. Okay. This is where classical dispensationalism falls apart. And this is why we cannot adhere to systems. We have to adhere to definitions that are carefully wrought, discovered, and how those apply to our Bible study. Okay, that's what we have to focus on. The church, not a good term. the assembly of Messiah, the ecclesia, the unity of Jews and Gentiles under one Messiah, saved by grace through faith, is an assembly. The church is not an age. Now, the assembly, the ecclesia, might have a time limit. It might have a time frame for existence. But that doesn't mean that Israel and the, quote, church are separate. No. Believing Israel is a part of the church. You cannot have an assembly without believing Jews in it. It is an impossibility. There would be no assembly of Messiah if it weren't for salvation coming from the Jews to the Jews, and then those Jews, those Israelites, like Shimon, Peter, and Paul, Shaul, and James, Jacob, bringing the gospel of the Messiah who had come to the nations, to the Gentiles. You cannot exclude us, Israel, from the assembly of Messiah. Is it an impossibility? The most Jewish person a person could do is follow the Jewish Messiah of Israel. Now, Jews, we debate on who that is, and that's fine. Let's have that discussion. But for my Christian friends, you cannot exclude us, and if you attempt to exclude us, Paul says there are dire consequences for that. I'm getting way down a rabbit trail here, but I hope that that has clarified some things for you. So why are so many so confused by this, though? I'm going to touch one more thing before we talk about the devil's delusion. Why are so many confused by this? So many people don't understand the relationship between Jews and Gentiles in the church because they're unaware of the history of the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, and what is called the remnant. All right. Now, Shaul, Paul, talks about this frequently, and so do other, Yeshua talks about this and other writers as well. But we primarily also see it in the Hebrew Bible, in the Hebrew scriptures, and that is the remnant of Israel. What is the remnant of Israel? There has always been and always will be a remnant or a portion of Israel that follows God. Believing Israel. Now, we know as Jews, most of us have not followed God. Most of us did chase after false idols under, whether it was Moses or Joshua or the judges or the kings or foreign powers, whatever it is. Time and again, we have chased after anything but our Creator. But there's always been a portion of us which God has preserved called the remnant of Israel. And today we exist as those Israelites, Jewish people, who follow Yeshua as the Messiah of Israel and coming King of the kingdom of Israel. So, Galatians 6:15-16, Paul refers to the remnant as the Israel of God. Romans 9:6, not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel. Both of these instances are used oftentimes to try to say that the church is the, quote, Israel of God. All right? It is an impossibility in context for this to be the case. This is theological mysticism. In context, it is clear that Paul is talking about Jewish believers, Israelite believers inside the nation of Israel. Okay? Not all who are of the lineage of Jacob, aka Israel, belong to Israel. What does that mean? It means that not all of us are following God. That's all it means. That's all it means. The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable, Paul says. Therefore, we must still exist, one. His promises and gifts and calling are still to us, number two. And there is a remnant, which Paul talks about, believing Israel. So, hopefully that'll clear those passages up for you. Again, a proper now application of the true definition of Israel makes it impossible to spiritualize and mysticize the term Israel or the nation of Israel into some spiritual entity that it isn't. 1 Peter 2:9. Many of you have been taught that this is that the church is a holy nation or a chosen race, a royal priesthood. The text never says that. In fact, 1 Peter 2:9 is Peter saying You Israelites that are dispersed outside the land that are following Yeshua, you believing Jews. Actually, he never uses the term Jews. None of Peter's writings does he use the term Jews. I go into great length in this in our book, The Rooted Kingdom. You need, again, if you don't have a copy, get it. But in that, Peter only ever uses Israel as a national identity when addressing his epistles. He's writing to the nation of Israel. The church is never called a holy nation. The church is never called a chosen race. Why? Because it is a unification of Jews and Gentiles, of all nations, underneath one household of God. It doesn't mean that Gentiles become Israel. Okay? It doesn't mean that Israel is now identity lost and becomes just part of the nations. The distinction remains, and that's totally natural and it's totally fine. That's the way that God wanted it to be. So simply put here, the remnant is believing Israel, followers of the Jewish Messiah, Yeshua, today. And in Moses' day, under the law, it was Israelite followers of the God of Israel. We've always existed. We've always been the ones following and obeying God. All right. Now, some of my Orthodox Jews friends are watching this right now, or even if you're not even Orthodox, maybe you're just quasi-religious Jewish, and now you're super offended saying that, that I'm saying maybe you're not part of Israel, they're not Jewish. I'm not saying that. But what I am calling you to consider is that majority of us Jews, the majority of Israelites throughout our entire existence, have been wrong about God. Read through the scriptures. The majority of us have rebelled against God and will always rebel against God. So if you're in the majority of belief as a Jew, we need to question. Now, historically, the majority of Jews were wrong about their belief in God. Do I really want to side with that part of the equation? Now, I'm not saying to make your decision based upon that, but I'm saying maybe you should stop and question for a second, am I on the right side of truth here? Because either God has left us in the lurch for 2,000 years with no temple and no system for sacrifice and no way for blood atonement, or he's given us a new way. And that new way was already promised to us, the nation of Israel. And listen to this, Christians. Jeremiah 31:31-34, I will make with you a new covenant, not like the covenant that I brought with you as I took you by the hand out of the land of Egypt, a covenant that you broke, though I was your husband. I will make a new covenant with you, house of Israel and house of Judah, meaning a unified Israel he's going to make a new covenant with. And it's what? It's not like the Mosaic law. He specifically says it. God promises us a new covenant, not like the Mosaic law. So what we should expect moving forward from Jeremiah is for God to introduce some covenant, some way to be reconciled to him, to have a relationship with him that isn't like the Mosaic law. And that has come in the person of Yeshua of Nazareth, who is the only person who fits the criteria of messianic hope in the Hebrew Bible, our Tanakh, our Bible. One more thing before I get to the devil's delusion here, and this is both to encourage my fellow Israelis and Jewish friends, and also to educate the doubters who still believe that you are true Israel and that God has cast Israel aside. Jeremiah 31:35-37, right after he promises the nation of Israel a new covenant. Thus says the Lord, who gives the sun for light by day, the ordinances of the moon and the stars for light by night, who disturbs the sea and its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, says the Lord, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation from before me. Thus says the Lord, if heaven above can be measured and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I will also cast off the seed of Israel for all they have done, says the Lord. So, the sea still doing its thing? Yeah. Waves are still doing their thing. It's still roaring. Yep. Sun's still doing its thing. Moon's still doing its thing. Stars still doing their thing. Has anybody been able to measure the universe to its nth degree or the foundations of the earth? So is Israel still a nation, still a seed before him forever? Yes. And you cannot steal that identity for your own purposes, because you will lose your true identity, your true purpose in this life. The things that God has for you are lost when you steal someone else's. So, if you trust in him, because God has not abandoned Israel, he will not abandon you. If you're relying on the work of Yeshua on the cross for your salvation, you can trust in that hope and that promise, because God has never broken a promise to the nation he created, the nation of Israel. Because God has not broken his covenants with Israel, he will not break his covenant with you in his promise of grafting you into that seed root of the tree of Israel through Yeshua's perfect sacrifice. How great are the consequences if God is not a God of his word? God is not a liar. He is not a man that he should lie. Okay? He does keep his promise and has always kept his promises to Israel. Therefore, we can all rest assured that he will continue in doing that good work. So, I don't want you guys to be deceived. And many of us, I try not to be deceived myself, but I am deceived sometimes. The work from the foundation of the creation of the world, go all the way back to Genesis 3. God makes a promise, not to Adam, not to Eve, but to the devil himself, that one day the seed of the woman will crush his head and destroy him. And that promise echoes throughout all of human history and human future eschatology, I mean, the things to come, the end times, because Satan knows one thing for sure. If Israel exists, God still has victory. So what you cannot be caught up in is something called the devil's delusion. So right now, let's get into that final moment here. Are you caught up? Have you been deceived by the devil's delusion? So, devil's delusion. We pause for a moment here and we go up to 30,000 feet, examine who is pulling the strings on the earth today. The ruler of this world isn't the president of the United States or the prime minister of Israel or the latest dictator to rise to power in Russia or some Islamic country. These are all just human authorities vying for human power. In John 8:44, Yeshua is talking to those who aren't believing in him and sees their hearts, their murderous hearts, and he says, "You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do also." He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. And then in John 12:31, and then 14:30, and then 16:11, Yeshua gives us a picture of Satan having authority over the world. His statements, I think, are a clear indication that Satan has authority over this current world system. So the father of lies is currently ruling the world. Paul addresses this fact, stating in Ephesians 6:12, for we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and against powers and the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. And this is the perspective we need to understand when we look at the world around us. Satan perceives himself as the one who is like the Most High, Isaiah 14. He is the ultimate perverter of identity. He lives in a delusion of identity and has chosen to manipulate the world that he rules in the same way. So he perverts the identity of humanity. He attempts to convince us that we are nothing special, that we're no more than evolved apes. We're not really any different from the bug that we accidentally stepped on as we left the house this morning. So he wants to think we're insignificant and unimportant and totally purposeless. And I think under this nihilist framework, he worked to pervert the clear and natural biological identity of male and female. First was to confuse the clear and natural gender roles unique to man and woman. And I think he's been very successful at this. Then he moved on to the very idea that humanity is male or female, right? Now that's absurd. That gender itself is a mental construct and has no limit of genders or even species or speciation. If you want to be a non-binary cat, be his guest. So those who aren't following God are the low-hanging fruit of his scheme. But he doesn't stop there. Then he goes after those who are following God and gets us to believe in this game of perverting identity, believing that we are something that we're not, and then demonizing those who don't fall in line with that delusion. And this is how the identity of Israel was stolen and perverted and maligned. If Satan can convince you to steal the identity of someone else, you will never understand who God has created you to be. So you need to understand that there is a battle being waged over identity. It isn't just the male, female. It isn't just the genders. It's at its core going all the way back, men and women, yes, but also Israel and the Jewish people, their identity. And we've been at the crosshairs of destruction forever because as long as Israel exists, God's plan for redemption moves forward. So it isn't just about male and female, although that's a big part of it. That goes all the way back to who God says he is and how he created us to be. But once you get into the narrative of the history of the world, that's why it's number 2. That's why understanding this is only second to understanding who God is. You have to get Israel right. You have to begin to understand the Bible, all of its revelation from beginning to end, under this discovered identity in itself of the nation of Israel, the remnant of Israel within that nation. How God treats us the same no matter if we're in the land, out of the land, rebelling against him, repenting, okay? We are still the nation of Israel. And because we're the apple of his eye, because we're the center focus of his eye, God says, do not poke my eye. And I'm going to do a whole other video on this, but I want to leave you with this, because you do not want to be on the wrong side of this devil's delusion. Because what happens to those who malign Israel, who don't treat her the way that God would treat her, he says you are cursed. Genesis 12, I will bless those who bless you. And in the Hebrew it says, I will curse those who treat you with contempt or treat you lightly. In other words, and I think this is safe to say here in context, those who don't treat Israel the way that God would treat her are cursed. You want to know why Tucker Carlson is so crazy? Why Candace Owens is so crazy? Why Ian Carroll is so crazy? Why Dave Smith, even though he's allegedly Jewish by descent, is so crazy and off the wall? Why Marjorie Taylor Greene is so crazy and off the wall when it comes to Israel and hating the Jewish people? Is because the true mind virus isn't Christian Zionism. That's the cure. The true mind virus is the hatred and the contempt of Israel. You do not want to be caught up in that delusion because you are a pawn of the devil. This is Root of Kingdom. I'm David Halevi. Thanks for being here. Love you guys. See you soon.
Barefoot I walked Jerusalem square. Blood fell on my trousers as the horses did draw near. Then gripped by fear I quickened my gait, steadily aware that I do not control my fate. So I reach out whatever comes about me will be in my Maker's sight. My Maker's sight. From the beginning cursed to toil, I rise to work anew, but my tools have all turned to spoil. Then all my vineyards did run dry, employing a man named Lucifer, trading wisdom for a lie. So I reach out and I hold tight. Whatever comes about me will be in my Maker's sight. My Maker's sight. Words drip like honey from her lips. Every intimate emotion poured out from her fingertips. This siren's ring is calling loud, but I must deny myself, if only to make my Maker proud. So I reach out, I hold tight. Whatever comes about me will be in